So I'll start tonight. I just keep using the same PowerPoint, but I go to different pieces of it. One of the piece I want to talk about tonight, and again, I'm kind of doing this in chunks where it's usually like a long talk that I don't know, build upon the other pieces. But problem solving is really an important concept for our kids because one of the tenets, I guess, the pillars of kids with social challenges, doesn't matter if it's from an autism diagnosis and anxiety diagnosis and ADHD sensory component, all these areas that create social challenges, the inherent deficit within social challenges, no matter what the diagnosis is really a lack of problem solving and a lack of flexible thinking. So we have to go beyond trying to teach and hammer social skills, which isn't up here, like a higher level skill. What we need to do is get to the foundation. So the diagnosis is kind of your up, like yes, all these pillars create the diagnosis, but what we really want to get under and what is important, like for our teachers and what we want to do as parents, is get at the flexible thinking and allow our kids to become flexible problem solvers and teach them how to think in a flexible way. Because if we think of the social world, everything is done in a very gray area thinking. So like I use the example a lot of, I used to see kids of all ages and adults, and I had this guy who was like 25, and he was coming to see me. My office was in Brookline at the time, so there was like a bus, a train, everything could get to my office. And he was coming because he was on the spectrum, and he really wanted to go back to these like basic skills that he knew. He had a job, he was fine, but he knew he was missing some of these basic skills, and he basically just wanted a girlfriend, which is super cute. But you can't have a girlfriend if you're a really static thinker. And so he was coming to me, and we were working on some of the same skills that we're working on with your 3s, 4s, and 5-year-old kids. And so one day, whatever, the train was not working. And so he came from Cambridge. So he did a bus to the train, and then he did the train to me in Brookline, and he didn't show up. And I got worried about him, and I called his house, and he answered. And I was like, Alex, where are you? And he was like, well, the train was shut down when I got to the train stop. And I was like, well, there's like 3 other ways to get to Brookline. This was, of course, before Uber, but you could have taken you could have taken these 2 other buses, and they would have both come to me in Brookline Village. And he was like, I didn't even think about that. I know that my plan is to take the bus to the train, and I get to you, and I walk to your office, and I'm done. So when plan A did not work, I shut down what I needed to do, and he went home. And so that in and of itself is a silly story, except that a 24-year-old guy couldn't think of a plan B. And so if you're in a social situation, and so that's what we then talked about, is like, part of his issues with social situations is he can't go to a plan B. He sticks with a plan A. And if plan A doesn't work, he doesn't have a backup plan. And he also wasn't reading social cues and all of those pieces. But what we're trying to develop in our kids is that when something isn't working or something's not how they expected, that they have a way to think about it in a flexible process, or a plan A has to evolve excuse me, to a plan B. So we want our kids to become more dynamic thinkers. So a static thinker is a very black and white thinker. And you've heard me talk about on other nights, black and white thinking, and how our kids really thrive in a black and white world because they have so many obstacles, like the pieces of the pie. They have so many obstacles that come into play so much of the time. The sensory world, the auditory world, their attention, they can't hold their focus, their language delays, all of these things combined, that it taxes them in so many different directions that then it's so much easier to think in a black and white way and to be able to process the world in a very black and white way. It's so much harder to think about the world in a dynamic way and to think about the world in a way that looks at things in a gray area way. So we kind of think about it from like an information processing approach, of kind of like we were talking about last night with the conveyor belt of, we take in information, we make meaning of the information, and we have to output that information. It is very well researched that kids with social challenges, and the research is more about kids with a spectrum disorder, but it really bodes very similar, and Karen Levine and I think very similar. The kids with an anxiety diagnosis is the same, is there's really an underconnectivity within that process, information processing conveyor belt. So a lot of people in like the neuro parts of research really look at it as an autism diagnosis, as an information processing disorder, because what happens is these kids are trying to take in information, but their system isn't kind of conveyor belting it the same as you or I would. So it gets jumbled into, this is so hard, this is so hard, and they come out with the output in a very black and white way. So what we want to do is really strengthen these kids and thinking about their different challenges, but really think about how can we like produce more flexible thinkers. And I look at flexible thinking is really the umbrella of what we want to do with all of the kids on. So if we look at like the stair step, all of these are foundational social skills that we want to work on. But if a child isn't thinking in a flexible way, they can't understand nonverbal problem solving. They can't understand co-regulation. Flexible thinking and dynamic thinking are really the crux of what we're trying to, is the big umbrella. We get at it with these little pieces, but the big umbrella is coming from a more flexible thinking standpoint. And I'm just, well, it's like way down in the PowerPoint, so I won't go to it. But the way we think about flexible thinking is really getting our kids to look at a scenario in a different way than what they are currently thinking about. So it is inherently more of a perspective taking approach of, and it's why we really start, I like to start with language, because just like Ancha's mom was saying, that when she turned the questions into I wonder questions, he opened himself up a little, even a little bit more, because a WH question has a very black and white answer. And that can be easy for our kids, but it's very anxiety provoking at the same time. So what our goal is really to come to use these areas of social development, but overall really develop problem solving within everything we're doing. So like last night, so what we're going to end up doing is looking at some of the same videos we looked at last night, but looking at the moments where a child had to solve a problem. The problems are very tiny, but that's the beauty of it, is those are the moments when our kids who really think statically are having to evolve their thinking into a problem solving, into a more gray area approach. And what I want you guys to look at is like a video like Arya and his parents, where I showed it was about the patterns the other night. Now I want to go back and look at the video and show you where that moment of problem solving occurs, because those are the moments that are building our kids building the strength of our kids' conveyor belt to be able to take in information and take in an unexpected piece of information and make meaning of it and see it as a fun adjustment rather than a really anxiety provoking adjustment. Some of the things that there are many reasons to do ABA, but one of the things I have a really hard time with around ABA is it's very rote and it's very rigid, and our kids thrive on that. That is what they're good at. So we're almost like feeding a beast of rigidity when we're doing things in a very rigid way. Now, a lot of ABA is shifting and it's going to a more play-based model, but using programs. But what we want to move away from is feeding into our kids' rigidities, because that is feeding into their yearning for kind of a static thinking way of doing things, because they don't have to problem solve it and they don't have to think about what they're doing. And what we constantly want to create is these moments of problem solving. So I'm going to start, we're going to go back to some of the referencing ones, but I want to start with, so this little video of Ario from the other night. So we were talking last night, or 2 nights ago, whatever, we were highlighting the patterns and the patterns of the sender receiver, which is, you always want to set up the patterns. You're going to do that all the time. But what I want you to watch in this video is the moments when Arya, the little boy, thinks that so he thinks his mom is one place and she's not, or thinks the dad is someplace and he's not. And that's when you see him adjusting his body or adjusting his thought process. And those are these tiny little moments that we're edging his moment of competence. And that is allowing him to engage in that is allowing him to feel more successful engaging in that social interaction. Because guaranteed, if we put mom and dad, if I sat them on squares and they if they sat in one place, Arya would execute the activity beautifully, but he would not be thinking while he was doing it. He would just be robotically putting the Unifix cube in the box. And that again is going for the product rather than the process. And what we're trying to do is create problem solvers so that at 24, when your kid misses a train, they're going to be like, oh crap, and think of 4 other ways that they're going to get somewhere rather than being anxious. Or when there's no chair at circle time, our teachers are never going to say, they're never going to go get that chair for a child. They're purposely not putting the chair in the circle time so that they're going to sit there and wait for Arya to be, and Arya's going to be there. There's going to be a chair in the room because we're always going to set him up for success. But they're going to look around and be like, oh no, and then just look over at the chair and let Arya solve that problem so that we're building his building his feeling of competence and building his feeling of success that he can solve this problem, rather than, like we talked about with language last night, having to rely on like this one-to-one person that's going to pipe in his ear. That's not what we want to do. We want to create independent problem solvers and independent thinkers. So watch this video and just look for the little moments when Arya has to alter his thinking or alter his body movement because of the parents being the unpredictable players at that time. I got one here. So right now he's learning the pattern. So dad's going to have to model again what the pattern is. So they're highlighting the pattern now. So that's not, this isn't the problem solving. This is they're just getting him to feel competent engaging. So now watch, he goes back to where he thinks mom is, and he shifts his thought to go to mom. Now watch, he's so I'm gonna play it. Well, I don't know how to fast forward it, but so there was the moment where he went to where he thought mom was going to be, and he did like I don't know, almost a 360 turn because he thought she was going to be here and he had to turn himself around. And then the next time he went to turn to where his mom was, but he had the conveyor belt thought, oh no, I know mom has shifted. So that's the problem solving moment of he solved a problem because I don't even know. It's the thinking process. Maybe we don't call it like problem solving. It's the dynamic thinking process that he went one direction. Mom wasn't there. He turned himself to the direction she was. And then the next time when he went, he corrected himself so much quicker because he knew he had already, the time before, he had dynamically made that shift already. That's the little tiniest moments of appreciation that we want to be thinking about a lot, because that's them making the independent thought. If mom would have said, Arya, I'm over here, she would have thwarted that thought process and he wouldn't have had to make that adjustment on his own. And my biggest part is the more the kids make the adjustment, the more they are owning it and it becomes internalized. And we want them to make those adjustments on their own. So I'm going to go back to, this is a good one. This is about co-regulation, and it's about kids moving together. But there's a moment where the kids start, they're holding, I think, like Magna-Tiles together. And there's a moment where they start to drop them and they adjust it on their own without the teacher giving them what to do.
Wow, you guys are staying together.
So it's the little moments where they are solving their problems and they're creating little breakdowns and they're repairing them. And that's how dynamic thinking is evolving, and we're strengthening that dynamic thinking as we go. This is one of the videos I showed you last night around communication. And I want you to watch how Maggie highlights a problem non-verbally, and the kids, you can like literally see their wheels turning as they're thinking about, oh my gosh, how are we supposed to solve this problem? What are we supposed to do? They're looking at each other. They're looking at Maggie. If she would have verbally told them, I need glue, that problem would have been solved in 2 seconds. And yes, it would have made the activity end quicker. But then again, that's about the product over the process. The fact that she just highlighted what the problem was and the kids had to work at the solution, that's teaching them to be more dynamic thinkers. Oh wait, this is the one. So it's less about watching her language this time, and it's more about watching her highlight the problem in a second. And now you'll watch the next problem Maggie has purposely done is set up that there's not enough glue, which we talked about last night. But watch how the kids use that conveyor belt thought process to figure it out. And it takes a while. So if Maggie would have just said, hand me some glue, none of these kids would have been strengthening that problem solving. And it takes them a while. You have to be really patient with these kids for them to notice. So that kind of shows a little bit of how you can use the nonverbal problem solving to, I'm going to try to show you a different video that's in a different place. We'll see how fancy I can get. Okay, so this, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to show you this video. I hope it goes. I don't know if it's going to go or not. Okay, so this is a video of me and my daughter. And I meant to show it last night, but I don't know. It didn't download at the moment. So I want to show about this video is and some of you guys might have seen it on Facebook today, so it's a repeat. But originally, and it was kind of a science experiment for me, and I like to use my kids for science experiments constantly, is if I directed her, would she give me as much nonverbal communication? Well, I'll be able to see if you guys can see her. Is she hidden from you guys by the little pictures? I hope not. So this is just me directing her by using colors. I'm doing it the wrong way, basically. This is my science experiment, is I'm doing it in a directive way of give me this, give me this, give me this. And what I wanted to see was how much she actually used like shared experience, nonverbal communication when I was giving her a directive, versus in a second, I'll show you a video when I use nonverbals.
Okay, so Maren, we are gonna make a tower together, and I'm gonna tell you which square to get, and then you get to make a tower, okay? All right, so get the blue one. And
what I want you to notice is how her nonverbal gaze at me decreases as the activity goes on. She's watching me now, but as it goes and she realizes she has no reason to look at me, she stops looking at me.
Can you get the blue one?
So there's what I'm going to show you is that when you're not using nonverbal communication, you're not watching for the dynamic thinking. And see how much she's not looking at me now? It's turned into a product-focused activity.
And red. And blue.
So,
okay. So stop that.
That's my other daughter videoing. So now I'm going to show you, if I can now screenshot the next one. Okay, so this one is me doing it non-verbally. And there's two reasons to watch this. One is how much more she's watching me and problem solving. Oh, I hope this is the next one. Watching me and using her problem solving skills. And then at the end, I throw in a curveball to make her think dynamically.
Okay, so Maren, we are gonna make a tower together.
That's our dog.
Tell you which square to get, and then you get to make a tower, okay?
Oh, wait.
All right, so get the blue.
Oh, hold on, this is the same one, sorry.
And get the yellow one. You can make a tower however you want. You get to be the builder. I'm just showing you which piece to get. Oh, okay. Can you get the green one?
Okay. Hold on. Let me go back to Zoom. All right. Now. Oh, this one. Okay. So this is.
So Maren, this time we're going to do it a little different. I am not going to use my words. And you are going to have to figure out which one I'm thinking about. It's like a magic challenge. Are you ready? Okay.
So what you can watch with her is she's her connection with me and her nonverbal referencing of me is drastically increased from the time when I was just telling her what to do.
I was just saying, whoa, it's too big.
So this is where I totally confused her, but a great like dynamic thinking process.
Happy birthday!
Okay, so there are two, I can get us off the screen. So from that, I was doing it as kind of an experiment, but from the problem solving aspect, there's the nonverbal moments. And then I created two, we were in the pattern. She got the pattern of I look at the piece, she puts the piece on. So then I wanted to vary it up a little bit for her. And so then I added that I wanted one to stand up. And she's played with those things before. So she knew that that was an option, but I hadn't told her what to do with them before. So that's when you see, and what we want to see is that she's looking to me for more direction. And that's the highlighting of the problem solving, that when she's stuck, she's not going to just go to her static thought process and just put it down flat like we had done for the 6 before that, and when we were doing it with the colors before that. She looked to me for more information. So that was okay, plan A didn't work. I put it flat and mommy said no. So I'm going to go with plan B, which also I think didn't work. So then she went for the plan C. So she kept looking. And if that would have been, I should have done the same thing, but wasn't thinking when I was giving her directed, like more imperative demands, because that would have been a problem solving moment, because I would have said, no, stand up. And she would have stood it up. And there would have been no kind of process within that. But when it was nonverbal, it turned into a really dynamic process. And then at the end, when I made her put it on her head, that was of course silly and not what was expected, but she stuck with me through it. And that's because you always start with a trusting relationship, and she knows I'm not gonna like do something, well, she does know I would do something crazy, but not like too crazy for her. But she stuck with me and she kept trying different options. Like, what do you want me to do? Put my head in the thing, or was the thing behind her? And that's her problem solving through a situation. So like my example earlier of not putting a chair at circle time or at home, not putting a chair at the dinner table, they're going to trust that you're never going to let them fail and you're never going to make them feel inadequate. So when the chair is not at the dinner table, they're going to look around, and then the goal is that they're going to look at you and you're going to say, oh no. And then maybe you'll look at the chair, or you'll help them solve that problem, but you'll allow them that moment of uncertainty. It's what we call in like the social world is giving the kids a moment of productive uncertainty, because productive uncertainty yields growth in flexible thinking. So if we go back to like walking, when a child is going from crawling to walking, there's that uncertain moment of we're going to release them and we know they're going to fall. But then they're going to learn that the next time they're going to take 2 steps, and then they're going to take 4 steps. But all of that is like a productive uncertainty of we're going to scaffold and put our arms close to them. But the falling is okay because it's teaching them how to get their legs underneath them again. What we want to teach our kids within the social realm is that productive uncertainty yields more flexible thinking, more the problem solving, and problem solving is how they're creating the flexible thinking. And the more we allow them uncertainty with a safety net, the more we're teaching them how to be flexible thinkers. And we're doing that through these little tiny problem solving moments that happen throughout the day. If all of a sudden their shoes aren't where they're supposed to be and we magically make their shoes appear, then the next day when you're not home and it's dad or babysitter and the shoes don't magically appear, then we have created anxiety in them because we have not taught them to problem solve that, oh, if they're not at the front door, maybe they're at the back door, or maybe they're in my room. But if we teach them, especially in this like time where we have time of, oh my gosh, you're right, your shoes are not here. I wonder where they could be. And you start scanning around, allow those moments of problem solving, or put the shoes somewhere else so that they're learning how to problem solve through some of those different moments. Does that kind of make sense for people? Or that, like, I would love to hear some areas where your kids get really stuck about it has to be rigid thinking, problem solving, flexible thinking is all one and the same. It's all which part do you start with? Do you start with, let's get a kid to be unrigid, which is, let's teach problem solving? So you can come at it from the rigid thinking, which is a top-down approach, or you can come at it from a problem solving approach, which is, we teach problem solving to make a child become more of a flexible thinker. So it's kind of all in the same realm of, a rigid thinker is a kid who I mean, in some ways, some things kids are rigid about because they're rigid about, but a child who needs a blue cup every single time at dinner, well, then our goal is, let's teach them some problem solving around, hey, tonight is a blue cup, but maybe tomorrow night can be a red cup, because we can solve a problem if the blue cup is in the dishwasher. And maybe, really, what I would say is, you never start with the blue cup, but you teach them these other little things, like blocks can go on your head, your shoes are not in the right place. You teach them it in other areas, and then it comes back around. Like, Rupan had a great random example that she put on Facebook of, they had tried to get Ansh to wear a bib 1,000 million times, never worked, but he's learned more flexibility in general, and now all of a sudden he's wearing a bib. So it's like, if they push the bib, it may not have worked, but if they hold flexibility and build flexibility, then all of a sudden the bib is like not an issue at all. I hope you're okay sharing